Hey everyone, welcome back to Todos Santos. Today we're going to be making extensive use of PO and several other mods and quite a few assets to make an absolutely massive shopping mall inspired by the Mall of San Juan in, well, San Juan. Let's go. Of course, we need to begin with a few modifications to the road network. One feature that I found somewhat interesting about the inspiration is that there's a unique interchange nearby, and then a frontage road that runs off of that and runs along the mall, feeding traffic into it. So I wanted to do something like that. But when you have this sort of surface road running next to a giant stack interchange, of course, it just multiplies the number of connections you have to make with the interchange itself. And the frontage road happens to end up running parallel to the right turn if people are turning from one freeway to the other. So that presents kind of a challenge because of the difference in elevation that we're going to get, which you'll see in a minute. And it also presents a challenge in that the frontage road and the right turn slip lane, I guess, of the interchange have to also feed into one another. So you can have traffic exiting from the interchange to get to the frontage road to access the mall, and vice versa. So that's kind of a challenge because whenever you get these kind of tight intersections, it ends up looking a little bit weird. So I just try to keep pulling things back and forth with Move It and Node Controller until it looks reasonable. Now, the freeway over here ends up being kind of a mess. It's sunken down here, so we need to have the slip lanes from the freeway meet up with it. So I add a second frontage road, which is down at the same level of the freeway, in addition to the one that's up above next to the mall. But then these also have to intersect over here, so I decided to do a little bit of spaghetti, connecting those with this main avenue that runs over this trench of freeway as well. Normally I don't make bridges curved like I do here, but I just thought it was kind of a cool opportunity. Next to the mall, maybe we could do something a little bit fancy and exorbitant compared to the usual, not cheap highway infrastructure of Todos Santos, but let's just call it budget friendly. But in this case, they're making an exception. They're spending a little bit of extra money. I don't particularly know why. Maybe they think this kind of spaghetti will draw people to the mall. I don't know. I decided to resist the temptation to make every direction accessible from this intersection. It really just has a couple ramps coming and going from this avenue. So it's not so much a functional interchange as it is an aesthetic one. It kind of seems like the freeway gets comically large because I keep adding on frontage roads and merging lanes, and it ends up looking a little ridiculous. So maybe we'll come back to that and spruce it up a little bit, make it look a little bit more unified. But for now, we're just going to connect it up with the rest of the freeway and move on to the surface roads, which are a little bit more straightforward. I thought about doing something a little bit different here, like a roundabout or something, but I decided to just go for a standard intersection. So we have the frontage road coming around. You can merge right onto this main avenue, or you can turn left to access that spaghetti interchange, or just cross the freeway. There isn't going to be a huge amount of traffic on this avenue, but I did want to use the 6-lane, I believe, big urban roads, just because I thought it looked cool. And maybe they're trying to future-proof here for when there are other sorts of development to accompany the mall. Okay, that's enough road building for now, so let's get to making the mall itself. The main asset that I'm using to give this place a distinct silhouette and a distinct look is the Liège train station by Nikkei's. That'll be linked down in the description if you'd like to see it. And then to bulk it out, I'm using a variety of big box store assets. These are all going to be in my asset collection, which is linked down in the description, along with the train station. Of course, we want this place to be really, really big. I mean, it is the Grand Mall of Todos Santos. So we're going to use quite a few of these placed at various points. And then we're going to flesh it out with a couple more buildings. So we have a movie theater, of course. We have a Cinemark here. I wanted to match the color of the asset to the rest of the buildings. So I'm going to go into PO as usual, use a color rectangle, just set to white at a fairly low opacity, and cover up all the sections of the texture that I want to lighten up. Occasionally I needed to grab a couple of the vertices in some of these just to make some adjustments and make it look more like a seamless building. It can be a little tedious sometimes, but I think it's worth it for this kind of build. I really wanted to put in the proper effort and proper amount of detailing, because it's been a while since we've done like a really kind of weirdly detailed build like this one. Now this next move is something I'm not that sure about if it works or not. Sometimes you'll see with shopping malls, they have kind of taller sections that are used for office buildings. So I wanted to use some of these generic office blocks for that. Obviously, turning it into a PO, lightening it up a bit, and sizing it up to fit the rest of the mall. And there are a few different versions of this that I do just to get some variation. Maybe it almost looks a little bit too futuristic or unrealistic. not really sure. Let me know what you think of that part of the build. Really, once we're done with the video, let me know what you thought of this build as a whole, but until then, there's still a lot to be done. Of course, it's a shopping mall in a car-centric city, so we're going to need to have an extensive amount of parking. Some of that's going to be in parking garages like this, and then later on we're going to add a whole bunch of ground parking as well. The main anchor store for the mall is Macy's, because it was just an asset that I had in my collection that I thought would work here. Of course, it's not quite to the same scale as everything else, so we need to scale it up in PO and just fill out some of this area with a second copy mirrored by going into the advanced edition tools and mirroring I believe the X-axis is what I chose. Just so we don't get a repetition of the facade of the Macy's building, we just get the back part. I found that was a pretty helpful technique for filling out some of the more boring areas of the mall. I didn't want the parking garages to just sort of be attached to the building. I wanted it to look like it was really integrated into the structure. So I'm just clipping it in just that little bit into these buildings here, the Macy's on the right and the kind of generic one on the left. And then the important part for the parking garages is running these roads underneath. One thing I noticed in the inspiration is that one of the roads behind the mall, or is it the back or the front? I don't know. Anyway, the roads on one side of the mall run basically right through the parking garage, which I thought was kind of interesting, I suppose. So we're going to do that for both of our parking garages here on either end of the mall. So that ends up working kind of as the guide for the mall's road network. And from there, we can connect it up with the main avenue and the frontage road. And don't worry, we're going to detail all these intersections up in a bit. So even after clipping these garages into the main structure of the mall, I still thought it looked a little bit too blocky. So I wanted to go back to our inspiration and just steal something from it, which involves kind of this little extension to the parking garage that I just thought gave it kind of a nice silhouette compared to just having a giant rectangular prism attached to the side of the mall. It's kind of a pain to make though, because these parking garages use various sub-buildings and it's really hard to access them with PO in the right way. But I eventually managed to get the frame of the parking garage and one of these actual parking pads, I guess you would call it. I don't know if that's the term, but that's the term I'm going to use. And then we can have this nice little appendage to the parking garage sticking out here. Obviously it's not functional, which is kind of disappointing, but it is there and it looks kind of cool. We're going to add some car props onto it later. Going along with the theme of office buildings being attached to this place, we have a little office building nubbin on the end, which I thought was kind of cool. And just to have it stand out that little extra bit, we're not going to turn it white. We're just going to leave it as the default color. One thing that I thought was interesting about the Mall of San Juan is that it has an apartment building basically in the middle of the parking lot, or right at the edge of the parking lot, I guess. From my research, it seems like the apartment was there before the mall, so it kind of makes sense. It doesn't really seem like they would want to build that apartment in that exact spot after the mall's already built. But anyway, the main reason I wanted to place that down now is just to find a place for it in the parking lot, because most of what we're doing at the moment is flushing out the parking lot and the road network. Mostly just trying to plaster as much real estate as possible with giant surface parking lots. Being this aggressive with plopping parking lots everywhere does result in some weird areas, so we have to make our own curb here with some ploppable pavement where the office sticks out into the parking lot. Now, at the time, I didn't know how much traffic this mall was going to generate, because we are going to try to make it functional in a little bit. Obviously, right now, it's just a dead mall, which is, fairly realistic. But anyway, I anticipated that it might generate quite a bit of traffic once it's no longer a dead mall. So I wanted to have some entrances that might allow for some sort of capacity. So we have 4-lane roads at these two main entrances. And then, of course, we already made the one with the frontage road, which really isn't an entrance, it's more of an exit, but, same thing. Now, as I was going to shape these parking lots to the curve of the avenue here, I realized that somehow I had managed, despite leveling this whole area out before doing the build, to have the avenue be slightly above the parking lots. But it actually looks kind of cool, and I'm going to use it for some detailing motivation later on. Now I've got all the buildings and the parking lots down, it's time to bring this place to life. So I'm using these distribution center buildings by Avanya. They function as warehouses, and I'm just clipping them into this bare wall that I had over here. Of course, I'm setting them to store commercial goods. You know, they would have probably a big warehouse in a mall. I don't really know how the logistics of a mall work, but I'm just going to imagine that there's essentially a warehouse in this part of the building. And in a place this big, it's not enough to just have one of these areas. We're going to jump over to the other side of the mall, where I guess this would be the back probably, because it's facing the freeway, there's not as much parking and everything. So anyway, on the back of the mall, they have another one of these. And I also set these to store more commercial goods. Now, to bring some jobs and attract some visitors to this place, we have commercial, office, and industrial blocks. Also going to clip a residential block into this apartment building. And we're going to put these at various points across the mall to try to attract people to all corners of the whole campus. The industrial blocks are really just there to generate some more trucks going back and forth once the warehouses are all filled up. And then, of course, the commercial and office blocks are pretty self-explanatory based on the layout of the mall that I've already described. I ended up reaching about 1,000 people employed in this gigantic mall, which it does seem a little high, but then again, it is a very big mall. Now, I didn't think that that was enough to really get this place busy, because I wanted a lot of people to come here. I wanted it to be one of the main attractions of the city. So I turned it into a park using the Park Life DLC, and adds a main entrance, some side entrances. I attached them all to each other with some invisible paths, and clip some entertainment blocks into here. Those are very good at attracting people to your custom parks. They actually bring a lot more people in than I first expected. So this place actually ends up looking like a really busy and popular mall, which is pretty cool. Okay, now it's time to finally get to the fun part, which is detailing. So I thought the entrances needed to look a little fancier than they did. At least from the ground level, they needed to be a little bit more interesting and maybe a little bit imposing. So I'm using these shades here. I forget exactly what pack this is from, but I'll link them in the description because they're very useful and quite flexible. So for the main entrances, I'm just shaping them as I need to with PO, squeezing them just a little bit to get them to be the right height without losing proportion too much, and tiling them out to either side just so we get enough coverage so that people parked here, or not parked, but being dropped off, would actually be shaded by the sun. Now I got really excited here because I saw this tiny little blue bar show up, and that's something we haven't had in a long time, is any sort of commercial demand. So I got pretty excited. And it's kind of nice that happened to line up with when we were making a giant thing that's immediately going to quash all of our commercial demand. Anyway, I thought this apartment building needed its own tiny little parking lot here, kind of separate from the rest of the mall. We're going to separate it out with a hedge or something later on, just to make that make a little bit more sense. And then we're going to go through and fill out all these surface parking lots with some actual parking spaces. As I saw all these cars starting to enter the road network for the mall, I realized that this intersection was going to be a huge problem if we didn't do a few adjustments here. So instead of allowing traffic to turn left coming off of the avenue there, or turn left coming the other way, I decided to block all left-turning traffic just to nip that in the bud before it gets bad. Of course, we need some crosswalks as well. While we're in here with IMT, might as well do that. There are a few other areas of the road network where we need to do the same thing. I start by using pavement, but we're going to go back and change these to gravel or dirt, and then put a few plants down so we can make them look nice and landscaped when we go through and do our foliage pass. And you may have noticed that there are actually quite a few parking lots left, so we need to put down more parking spaces. And more. Shift this wall really quickly. And more parking spaces. And some more over here by the warehouse. And more over here. Kind of hard to get some on this corner here, but I figured it was probably worth the effort. Yeah, this is a very big build, and I was very careful initially to measure out the proper size. So like I talked about that back when we did the landfill build, you can go into Google Maps, take your measuring tool out, and see how big the thing you're trying to build is in real life. And I tried to get an equivalent size. You might have noticed at the beginning of the build I had some gravel roads laid out, so I wanted to get this thing to be the proper scale. It might have even ended up being a little bit too big, which usually isn't a problem I have in this game. But anyway, we're done with the parking lots for the most part for now. So I wanted to have this little area here around the back next to this random loading dock. This would be a place where they could have concerts or events, or, you know, a farmer's market maybe occasionally, something like that. It's not in the most attractive place for that kind of event, but it's the space that they had, I guess. Now we have the problem of all this plain, boring pavement that runs around the outside of the mall. So I'm going to go through and use these cobblestone decals. I imagine they wouldn't actually be cobblestones. They would, or maybe they would, but they would be intended to evoke the feeling of being, on a cobblestone street, even though it's really a quite modern development. I'm mostly just doing it the good old-fashioned copy and paste decals with Move It way, but occasionally we need to go in, turn one into a PO, and just drag the vertices to fit whatever weird angle we have in some of these locations. I am trying to give the exterior of the mall just a little bit of room to breathe in some places, leaving some grass that we're gonna do a foliage pass and go and fill all that in. I also had this kind of awkward gap in between these two buildings, so I just figured that would be a secondary entrance, so I'm just gonna cover it up with this thing, and I think that serves well enough to cover up that ugliness. Okay, so we've come full circle all the way back to this weird little stage area, and it's time to do some of the less repetitive details. I thought the walls of most of the mall looked a little bit too plain. Obviously, you're going to have some areas where there's just nothing on the walls, but I did want to add a sign here. Since the Macy's is supposed to be kind of the anchor store and one of the main entrances for the mall, I wanted these plain walls to be spruced up a little bit. So I'm just deleting everything, basically using PO from the Macy's building and just having these banners so we can have a couple extra of those hanging around. There's also this area. I thought this might be a little more of a boutique area where all the expensive stores are, so they have their own little storefronts next to the Macy's. I'm just using all the same techniques as we've been using previously with PO, changing the shape and size and color as needed. This area also happened to be the best place I thought to have our bus line come in and stop at the mall. We do have a bus line running along the main avenue, so I'm going to decorate this up with a nice little planter and some benches, and we're actually going to take this theme and copy and paste it all the way across the mall. But for now we're going to add this bus stop here and expand upon the details for that with a couple more of the same benches, of course a little bus stop sign, and yet another of these amazing shelter assets. There also happened to be a crosswalk there already, which is very handy. Although actually not handy enough because I thought it didn't look exactly like I wanted, so we're going to go in with IMT and make our own. I feel like that usually is how it ends up going. Like there's a crosswalk that looks half decent, but the IMT ones just always look better. Now, copying and pasting these planters all over got pretty old, so I just cut most of that out, but there was this one little interesting plaza I had here where there was a lot of space to fill up, so I thought it might be nice to have a fountain here. We have a little pedestrian roundabout, I guess you could call it, running around it, just so we don't get people walking through the fountain, which is probably not the best look. I realized that this intersection was going to have the exact same problem that the other one was, although I did end up allowing some left turns here just because I thought it would be kind of awkward to have these really long right turns out of this big parking lot. But it hasn't become a traffic problem yet, so that's fine. And then, like I mentioned before, this non-functional parking garage needs some cars on top of it, so we're just going to take these car props. I have to turn them into POs, otherwise they're just not going to stay in their elevated position. They'll sink back down to the ground. So I'm just preparing for that by turning them into POs. There's this ugly seam here with these parking spots, so I decided to just have it look like there's a little bit of damage that's been repaired here, I guess, with this metal plate and a nice damaged decal, just to cover that up. Okay, now we need to protect all these pedestrians that are walking around the mall, or at least make them feel a little bit safer when they're on the sidewalks. So I'm using these bright iron fences, just making a line with IMT and adjusting the offset and the shift so that it lines up with the edge of the sidewalk so that the pedestrians are on one side and the cars are on the other. And I seem to be noticing a bit of a theme in this episode, which is that we're taking this and copying and pasting it all along the entire exterior of the mall. And this is just to give a nice cohesive look to the whole layout of the mall. I had this kind of interesting opportunity here. We have a pretty large crosswalk that comes up over here from the school across this avenue, and there's a straight shot up from there to the parking lot. So I thought it might be cool to have a stairwell here that people could walk up, and so that way they wouldn't have to go all the way down the avenue, turn a corner, turn onto the even larger avenue, and then enter the mall from there. So this way they could just get there immediately. And that's nice because that would give very easy access from the university district. I could imagine that a lot of students would probably come here since it's just over on the other side of the freeway. So as long as they can survive crossing the freeway, they'll be able to access the mall very easily. Because this is probably the main pedestrian entrance for the mall, there wouldn't be a lot of people obviously coming from the direction of the main freeway, and there probably wouldn't be that many people coming from the large avenue either, because there's just not much of the city on the other side of it. But anyway, they'd want to have a nice clear view of the mall from this side. So I'm using some terraforming roads, setting them at an angle so that we get this nice gentle slope of grass here. And I'm taking this stone step asset that I used here and flipping it over, sizing it down with PO so that we can carry the same texture all the way down the edge of the parking lot. That's just really standing in for a nice little pathway there. I think that actually ends up looking fairly nice. Of course, we need some lighting as well, so I'm using these Malacone lights because they look very nice. And I'm also clipping some lit up bushes underneath them. I don't exactly know why I did that or if it's very realistic, but it looks pretty cool at night, so there's that going for it. And it's probably not a good idea to have this path running along this grassy slope without some sort of fence there, so we're going to put our normal bright iron fence along there and take our lighting theme across there as well. I didn't really want the plain grass texture sticking out, so I'm using these same grass buildings and props that I've mentioned before that have contributed to our building limit problem. But in this case, I think they're totally worth it because they look really nice. They really just freshen up these areas of plain grass. And we're finally encountering the ever-present bane of my city skyline's existence, which is the ruining texture and the excess concrete on the edge of parking lot roads, or really any roads. There's a cute little bus stop here along the avenue. I thought I'd connect it up to the mall's road network with another copy of this upturned stone step asset. And also add a little crosswalk here. I think I tried something with IMT there and I couldn't really get it to work, so I just used decals. Okay, now the long-promised foliage pass is going to happen. I'm using a pretty small set of trees here. We have a crown tree, a royal palm, some various shrub assets that I think look like a nice bridge in between too wild and too pruned. And they also aren't too bushy, so if you were down there in the parking lot, it wouldn't feel like you were in the jungle, but it also wouldn't just feel like a bare slab of concrete, even though that's like 90% of what it is. But anyway, trees. There's kind of this cool little sign that they have tacked onto the side of the mall. It seems to be temporary because it doesn't show up when you go down into Street View images, but I whipped up a little kind of cheesy looking equivalent in Photoshop with the name The Mall of Todos Santos. I used PO to set the custom texture for a random billboard prop, and I set that texture to my kind of poorly made, cheesy looking custom mall sign. I don't know, it's kind of cool. It was a little bit not quite the right color, so I need to dim it down just a little bit. And I'm using these freeway gantry sign networks just to make it look like there's something up there sporting that sign. This one would probably be a little bit more permanent than the one that's on the inspiration. It's also in a very nice spot to advertise the mall to people on the freeway while they still have a chance to exit and get onto that frontage road we built. Now, we still have a bit of a blank wall problem, so I have advertisements of attractive people to try to shame you into coming into their stores and buying stuff that will make you look like them. That's how life works. And also a nice reference to our film studio. They are currently, I guess, or recently finished producing a version of the Phantom of the Opera, so I guess they're showing it at this theater. And then there are just a couple more generic-looking ads plastering the walls in a couple of other locations. Now this one was kind of a last-second idea, so it might be a little bit half-baked, but I thought it was kind of cool to use this hospital wayfinding sign as a list of some of the stores that you would find at the Mall of Todos Santos. Some of them are actually advertised on the outside of the mall. Some of those you could just imagine they would be on the inside. So I basically just took that and put it down on all the main entrances to the mall. I had an original version where I didn't actually have the name, the Mall of Todos Santos, on top, so I decided to go back and replace it with the one that did, because that just looked a little bit more natural. Okay, now there's a serious problem with the mall, which is that it has a giant flat roof with absolutely no features on it. So we're going to change that with some solar panels. Of course, we need to give them access so you could actually get up there and do some maintenance. I just turned a generic commercial building into a PO, made it a little bit smaller, and brightened it up. I'm also going to add a variety of other roof props, like some AC units, some vents, and probably some other stuff. I don't know exactly what all this stuff is, but I think it looks kind of cool, and it adds a little bit of clutter to the roof. And I added a few of those in each segment of the mall. And while I was up here hovering up above the freeway, I thought I might as well add some trees back into the interchange that I deleted before, so we could do some interchange renovations. A build of this scale with all these POs is going to require quite a bit of lighting, so I wanted to have kind of a cool feature, going with the theme of making this place look attractive from the point of view of driving by on the freeway to try to get people to pull off and stop here. You know, if they happen to be going by at night, I wanted to have it be lit up with this very nice blue color scheme that kind of goes with the poster that I made. So I have a couple shades in various areas shining up into that main iconic look of the Liège station that serves as our mall's roof. Also, instead of going with the orange lights, I wanted to go with these nice bright white, more modern, I guess, LED looking ones. So I use network skins to upgrade the parking lots, although there are a few places where I have to add them manually because I have a bunch of traffic manager lane connections set and I don't want to get rid of them by upgrading the road to change the lights, so I just have to plop down some props instead. And then we also have some lights lighting up our various signs. A warning light on top of the radio mast at the very tip top of this office building in the center of the mall. And then wherever there are still pools of shadow left, I have some of these very handy wall lights in the same color temperature. And I thought, why not add another splash of blue underneath the main entrance? So if you've been keeping up with the series recently, you're probably now expecting that we're going to do a huge suburban expansion around this place, and you're not wrong. I'm going to keep it as quick as possible, but we're starting with a residencial, which is like a public housing sector. I'm using these older buildings that aren't quite accurate to the ones you would see in Todos in San Juan. There are some more accurate assets available in the workshop now, so we're going to be coming back probably in a future video and upgrading this to be much more authentic and cool looking. But this is inspired by a real public housing project next to the mall in San Juan that we used for inspiration. The rest of the suburban development of this episode is just going to be in a very quick before and after format, like you might be used to from the last couple episodes. So we have one neighborhood across the freeway, and then we have this big area here, which just really stumped me. This took me over a week to make of just playing a little bit every day, and I just couldn't really get motivated to fill all this area in. But I eventually managed to do it bit by bit. But I'm really happy with the final result. I think it looks pretty realistic and gives a nice sense of scale to the area around the mall. And yeah, definitely is not contributing to our whole hitting the building limit problem. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Todos Santos. I put a lot of time and effort into this episode, so I really hope that you enjoyed it. Can't wait to see you on the next one. Bye-bye.